Okay, it's 6:30, so I think if we begin. I've got the usual statement on a virtual meeting. So I am Councillor Edwards, the Chair of the Human Resources Committee, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting, which is being held virtually and in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings, which is reflected in the recently published government regulations. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will also be available to view after the meeting is finished. Councillors who sit on this committee are identified by name on the screen, and I will introduce the officers by name before they address the committee. Councillors are reminded that although this meeting is being held remotely, they are regarded as being present in a meeting of the council, and they should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the Member Code of Conduct and not allow members of their household to distract them during the course of the meeting. Can members also ensure that their mobile phones are either switched off or on silent? Members of the committee will turn on their video link during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they have been invited to speak by myself as the chair. Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they will be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote taken on the item under discussion. Members can indicate their wish to speak by raising their hand and should only speak when I, as chair, invite them to do so. The officers present will only switch on their video link during the item that they are presenting or where they wish to be invited to speak by me as the chair. As the chair, I will confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time in the agenda who will address the committee by audio link. Councillors should declare that if they are leaving the meeting and switching off their video link, if they have a disclosable pecuniary interest or other personal interest in an item on the agenda, the councillors can switch on their video link when I call the next agenda item. Voting will be taken by a roll call, and I will confirm the recommendation proposal to the committee before the voting begins. Can each member indicate whether they are for or against the recommendation or whether they wish to abstain? Hopefully we won't have any IT issues, but if so, can you please immediately contact the Democratic Support Officer, and then the meeting link will be resent. Okay, so first of all, apologies. We've had a few last minute apologies, firstly from Councillor Capon and Councillor Reid. Okay, item 2, are there any declarations of interest? No, okay. Item 3, if any urgent matters? No, so I don't consider there to be an urgent item, so we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the minutes. So we've got it for the 17th, 24th and 29th of September. So there's quite a lot there, but this was all for the recruitment meetings. So I think quite a lot of you were in attendance. I know there were some subs, but can just have a vote. We all agree that they're accurate and they're okay to be passed? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so the first main item is the gender pay gap report. So I think if you get Sarah to run through it, and then obviously we'll have the questions and debate, just to make sure we've all been asked to note the report. Okay, so can I hand over to you, Sarah? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, everyone. So just to give a quick summary of the gender pay gap report. So I'm sure you'll be aware that there is a requirement for us as a public organisation and as a council to publish information related to the relative pay gap between male and female employees, and this is part of the Equality Act 2010. And it's important and a requirement that all employers must comply with the regulations for any year where they have a headcount of 250 or more employees at the snapshot date. So for local authorities, our snapshot date is the 31st of March. You also may have seen quite recently in the news that nationally the government have actually put a 6-month suspension on enforcement action. So therefore there's not actually a requirement to publish the information until October. However, as we have already compiled the data and preparing to share it with you, and we think it's a really important piece of information that we share with residents and with the borough more widely, we are still proposing to publish on the 31st of May as we normally would do. So key highlights from our pay gap information this year. So for 2020, the mean gender pay gap was 2.22% in favour of women, and that compares with a national picture of 14.6% in favour of men. So as you can see, it compares very favourably, and the pay gap has reduced. So it was 3.23% in favour of women in 2019. In terms of the median gender pay gap in 2020, that's at 20.52%. That's also in favour of women, comparing with 15.5% nationally in favour of men. And our gender pay gap has increased slightly from last year in relation to the median figure, which was 12.99% in favour of women last year. The other bit that I think is important to draw your attention to, which is referenced in the report, is around the mean and median bonus gender pay gap. Now, I've mentioned this to the committee before, but obviously the council doesn't pay bonuses in the traditional sense and understanding of that word. However, because we have honoraria and that can have an element of performance related to it, this does need to be declared as a bonus. So our mean bonus gender pay gap for 2020 was minus 50.69%, so i.e. that's in favour of women. That's changed quite significantly from last year, where it was 21.96% in favour of male employees. The reason I draw your attention to this is because so few of our staff receive honoraria, this does tend to change quite dramatically from year to year in terms of the overall percentage, and that's just because we have so few employees who actually receive that honoraria that one individual either way can significantly change the overall percentages. So it does fluctuate wildly from year to year, but that's the reason why. Other than that, as I say, we continue to have a good position in comparison to other authorities, public sector and nationally, in relation to our gender pay gap. So this is, I think, very positive for us as an organisation, and is one element of us showing our commitment to equality, diversity and inclusivity within the organisation. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So have we got any questions? Got Councillor Raskin, have got your hand raised.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank Sarah and the team for an excellent report, and one that gives rise to strong feelings that we are doing many things right. Can I ask why there is not comparisons with other borough councils and HCC within the report? I think it would have given a little bit more context to where we sit with our local authority friends.
So happy to pick that up in terms of previous years. Obviously, what we can't do is report on their figures for 2020, because like us, there isn't a requirement for them to publish. Well, it's October this year, but normally they wouldn't be required to publish until the 31st of March. So actually we would have access to everyone else's information at that point, at the same time that we'd be publishing. However, we can certainly look at that for previous years. So at least that can provide some context, but just obviously to be aware it would be a year behind.
Can I ask that this committee sees that when they publish their reports at some point in the coming 6 months or 8 months, and we get some context around it? So something that could be added as a note to us as a committee.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, Councillor McKay.
A simple question. I'm not familiar with the term honoraria, and I just wondered if Sarah could give me some examples to help me understand, please.
Apologies, I wasn't quick enough on the buttons to unmute, put the video back on. Yes, absolutely. So it's also something that's referenced in the pay policy statement, which we'll come to later on the agenda. So honoraria are really additional payments that are made in very specific circumstances. So if, for example, someone is acting up for a period, and that might be because someone has gone on maternity leave, someone is absent, long-term sickness, there's a gap whilst we recruit to the role, something like that, then quite often an honoraria would be paid, and because it may be they're taking on an element of the role, not the whole role that somebody else is taking, for an example. or there may be an additional responsibility that someone has been given, which is kind of over and above the normal day job. So that may also mean that they're paid an honoraria. But as I say, that is something that is not paid universally. There are very small numbers of staff who do receive those. And as I say, that's why the pay gap information varies wildly in relation to the honoraria.
Okay, any further questions? No? Okay, anybody want to just make any comments, observations about the paper? No? Okay, so are we all okay to note the report and the council's gender pay gap report in Appendix 1? Okay, and then as per Councillor Rattigan's point that he raised, that the HR committee will be sent a comparison of the gender pay gap from HCC and other local authorities when that information has been published. Okay, we all in agreement on that one? Yeah, perfect, thank you. Okay, so the next item is number 6, and that's the Smarter Ways of Working programme. So this is more of an update of where we are at this moment in time. And again, I've got Sarah to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So I thought it was probably helpful, and is within the report as well, for us just to have a brief reminder as to the vision of the Smarter Ways of Working programme and why it is as an organisation that we embarked on it. So the overall vision for the programme is to make sure that staff are enabled to meet the needs of the council, including members, residents, businesses and other stakeholders, through being able to work flexibly and cost effectively. Part of it is that staff wellbeing is supported and valued through enabling a healthy work-life balance and underpinning our focus on inclusion within our workplace. That we have a work environment that's empowered and enabled by technology rather than hindered by it. That performance is monitored by outcomes, not processes. That the office has been rationalised, enabling more co-location opportunities with other partners. There's a reduced carbon footprint and impact on the environment through reduction in necessity to travel and a rationalised accommodation requirement. The space is shared, enabling more collaborative and effective working across teams and services. And the focus is on what is achieved for residents, businesses and stakeholders rather than where it is done. So in order to achieve that vision, the Smarter Ways of Working programme is divided into 3 main work streams. And again, we've referenced this previously at committee. There's a people work stream, a technology work stream and a workspace work stream. Within this report, I have focused on the people work stream because this is the HR committee. However, I've also made reference to the other 2 because clearly all of the work streams will have an impact on staff. So the people work stream itself is divided into 4 areas of activity. So we have policy and process, learning and development, communications and engagement, and employee relations. And I'm just going to give you a brief summary of each of those. What I would say up front is that this is a live transformation project that we are undertaking as we speak. So it is quite a movable feast. So there are a number of things that have changed or been updated since this report was put to paper. So I will try and draw your attention to those as we go through. So as again, we've referenced previously at committee, clearly the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the nature of the work that we needed to do within the people work stream. Prior to COVID-19, the majority of staff rarely worked at home, if at all. Whereas as a consequence of the pandemic, with very little notice, staff moved from that position to working from home for all of their working time for many staff. And there's been lots of activity that we've needed to do to support that transition. Clearly, that's led to colleagues missing face-to-face interaction with each other and missing the ability to work alongside their teams. So therefore, initially, Smarter Ways of Working in terms of the people work stream would have been focused on encouraging people to understand the benefits of working from home. Actually, what we're now doing is something quite different, which is helping people to understand that how we're working at the moment isn't smarter ways of working. So it was never envisaged that people would be working from home for all of their working time. The way we're working at the moment is as a result of the pandemic. Smarter ways of working will allow more flexibility. So in terms of our policy and process, clearly it's really important that we have the appropriate policies and processes to successfully embed smarter ways of working across the council and to ensure that we can make that transition effectively from working under the pandemic to working under SWO. So to help us do that, feedback's been gained from a whole range of forums, including via our change champions, via our operational management group, staff forum. We've also had questions at staff briefings. And that's helped us to understand what the questions are with regards to the programme and how we can best address those through the relevant policies and processes. So a number of policies are being updated with a focus on the home and remote working policy, because this very much underpins the programme. And that's being rewritten to support the line manager understanding how they can help successful home working, and also to provide some clarity on the general principles of home working, including things like health and safety, learning and development, and staff wellbeing. In addition to this, we rolled out in December 2020 a mandatory DSE and self-assessment and e-learning module to support staff who are working from home, and all of the completed assessments are reviewed by line managers so that any further actions can be identified and undertaken in support of that. And really the purpose of that assessment is to make sure that when staff are working from home, not only do they have the equipment that they need to support them, which is obviously very important, but more widely that we've got the appropriate measures in place to support their wellbeing more generally. And the assessments enabled us to identify any gaps, for example, where staff have needed to collect additional equipment to support them working from home. And the e-learning module really just helps them to staff to see what a setup at home should look like. So what the workspace should look like and how to do that in the best way to support them. In terms of learning and development, we've said right from the beginning that line managers are really key to influencing employee wellbeing and engagement. And that's the same throughout the pandemic and will be as we move into smarter ways of working. So as we've previously reported, fairly early in the pandemic, we designed a managing remote teams virtual module, and 85 managers across the authority attended that. And that was designed to help them support their teams whilst working from home, and also provided a really good opportunity for managers across the authority to talk to each other and to share best practice as we navigated through the pandemic together. Following delivery of that, we opened a wider wellbeing training module, which was open and still is open to all staff. So we commenced that in November 2020, and we're now running sessions right the way through until the end of April this year. And this is about supporting staff working in the pandemic, whether they're working at home or working in the community, helping us get through the winter into the spring months, and also how to deal with potentially if we've got challenging calls to have while we're at home, or how we deal with being absent from our teams, working differently, and how we support our own wellbeing and resilience during that. And again, that's been a really important opportunity for staff to get together and engage with colleagues that they may not necessarily speak to on a day-to-day basis. We're continuing to look at other ways that we can support staff moving forward, and currently we're focusing on a resilience during change programme. So the wellbeing module I just talked about was very much focused around the current period of the pandemic. Resilience during change is moving us forward to actually think about how we cope with the change that's coming within the authority and the wider society over the coming months and years. So that will be a key part of our learning development offer moving forward. Clearly, in terms of comms and engagement, this is going to be really key for us in terms of the Smarter Ways of Working programme, and our change champions are really central to that. So their role is to help us support the vision of SWO and to motivate others to share that. They also provide a really helpful source of information. They engage with their teams and understand how their teams are feeling, what they're looking forward to, what their concerns are around smarter ways of working, and that helps us to shape the programme moving forward. We meet with them on a monthly basis, and it's a really helpful opportunity for us to gain their feedback. In addition to communication via the Change Champions, we're also setting up a dedicated SharePoint site or on Simbad. And actually, since this report has been written, that was actually launched, and colleagues may well have seen it in the Friday emailer last week. That's now up and running on the intranet site. So staff can go in, have a look at the key work streams, get some updates as to what's happening. There's photos going on in terms of the works that's happening in Deans. So it's a really live, up-to-date source of information for staff who want to know more about smarter ways of working. In addition to that, the comms team also worked really hard on producing an animation video to explain SWO in a way that's really accessible and really engaging. And again, that was launched last Friday and is now available for everyone to view. We're also running one of our monthly staff briefings in April, specifically focused on smarter ways of working. So again, a really good opportunity for staff to engage and hear about the programme. And as I mentioned, we've also met with key groups such as Staff Forum and the Operational Management Group to unpick some of the key questions and operational challenges around smarter ways of working to help us shape, but also engage with staff moving forward. Clearly, engagement with yourselves and your colleagues as members has also been a key consideration. And as you're aware, briefing sessions were held which were available to all members to provide them with key information regarding the programme and its potential impact for you. This was followed up by a survey, which again was open out to all members regarding key aspects of the work stream around workspace, looking at things like group rooms and their layout, the adjustment or refurbishment of council chambers and other key areas. And also members as well as staff were involved in the declutter project within Deans. So obviously making sure that we could clear the space so that the refurbishment work could commence. Finally, in terms of the people work stream, we have employee relations. So obviously it's one thing to make sure that we have the appropriate policies and processes in place, and that's really key, but it's also important that we follow the right processes to bring about the change. So I meet with our local Unison reps on a fortnightly basis to discuss a range of things across the authority, which includes the Smarter Ways of Working programme. And it's also important that the programme will address any required contractual changes as a result of the Smarter Ways of Working programme. And again, we're currently working through that. So that's a very brief highlight in terms of where we are on the people work stream. Just very briefly in terms of the other two work streams. So technology, again, you'll be aware because we've discussed previously that a key element of the programme is the rollout of IT equipment. So the fact that we're holding this meeting on Zoom, which was introduced as part of the response to the pandemic to enable us to work virtually. We've also rolled out Microsoft Teams across the organisation in terms of making that available for people to use. And by March, it's anticipated that all staff will have the IT kit they require to work effectively in the office or from home. I would say that almost everyone has that up and running already, and that we're now looking at operations staff who in the past may not have had access or suitable access to corporate information for them to be issued with smartphones so that they'll be able to fully engage in all of the communication that we provide about all of the activities within the authority. In relation to yourselves as members as well, we've got a group of volunteer members currently trialling a variety of devices, and that's part of our member engagement, part of the work stream to support the rollout of these devices post the all-outs in May. Finally, in terms of the workspace work stream, as I've already alluded to, this is about the design, planning and delivery of the refurbishment of Deans. So there's a number of elements to it, which is about fitting it out and making sure we use the space in the best possible way, using the third floor for storage and enabling better communication across the teams within the authority. It's also designed to free up space within the Parklands building. So again, making that available for others to use and for us to rent out. So again, when this report was written, it talked about the works in the ground floor starting shortly. They have started, they are now underway. And as I say, there's some really interesting photos on the SharePoint site of the work that's happening, which is really positive. And that ground floor will include our customer space, our reception area to welcome customers and visitors, and also the political wing, which will include the committee rooms and group rooms that used to be on the first floor. And then the refurbishment of the first and second floors will come later on this year. So I think just by way of closing, I would say that this is certainly not something that's been limited to myself and my teams. This is a huge joint effort across the authority, a whole range of teams, transformation, comms, HR, facilities, IT, property, finance, all of the teams who've come in to declutter in Deans and to do all of that whilst also managing COVID response and a whole range of business as usual, I think has been really impressive. And it's been a real collaborative effort from a number of teams across the authority to get us to this point.
Thank you. That's a lot of work that's gone on there. Thank you. Councillor Rattigan, you had your hand raised first.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points, if I may. The fundamental piece for all change is communication, if I can be honest. So two things. Firstly, for new staff coming in, how are you going to bring them in now and make them aware that the SWO changes are coming? And then I'll answer that, and then I've got another couple of points, if I may.
My apologies, Councillor Rattigan. I think that may have been an issue on my end. I didn't catch all of your questions, so my apologies. Because I just asked you to repeat, please?
Yes, I can. I mean, obviously, staff are still coming in now. How are we going to ensure that they are well aware of what's happening within the SWO process that would affect their jobs, so as they're not coming in under some illusion that that their working practices are not about to change. That first, if I may.
Absolutely, thank you. Yes, so that will be a key part of our induction moving forward. So at the point that we moved to working from home, we switched across our in-person corporate induction to a virtual one, but that is something that we are also currently reviewing moving forward. Obviously, with Russell having joined, it's important that we update the information that we're sharing as part of that corporate induction, and we're also reviewing that to include smarter ways of working. In addition to that, obviously, as managers are interviewing, offering to staff and talking to them about starting within the organisation, obviously that's a key part of that local induction conversation as well.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm slightly disappointed that in the comms and engagement piece, there is not a member interaction with staff in this. So as everybody is aware that we used to sometimes go up to planning or to other officers and sit at their desk and try and get them to answer some of our queries. I would have liked to have seen something within this to talk about how we as members will interact with staff under the SWO proposals.
Thank you. And I would say that's absolutely part of the work that we're currently doing. So when I talked about some of the exploration that we've been doing with the operational management group, for example, the OMG, and also around some of our change champion work, we've been talking about how we can provide a link so that members can access Teams, and so that if an identified person that you know isn't available, how we can have a duty officer or another similar term, so that there's always someone that members can reach. The other point that I would say is part of the programme is that we will have zoned areas within the building for certain teams. So it's not as if we will have people sitting in different places all across the building. The idea is that there will be key zones for different teams and areas for directorates, so that if you want somebody in planning or any of the other teams that you mentioned, that there will be an area where those teams are sitting, so that you know where you need to go to rather than wandering around. So between those two, that will be part of that planning. But I would say we're still working through those in terms of how we make that happen in practice, because we're not in the building at the moment. So there's still things that we're working through.
I'm grateful, because there might be 54 different councillors in who have very little knowledge of how a council works and how it responds to members' queries or questions from residents. So I think it is important that we can flesh that out before everybody comes back and they've got new induction packs for after the election. So just bear that in mind. There's not that many weeks till the next election.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. I'm delighted to hear Ken say that we're going to have 54 members who might not know what they're doing, as opposed to the current 60. But my questions are on 357, the e-learning module, is that available to members? And on the refurbishment of Deans, when do you think it will be finished? And will members get an opportunity to view it before they start using it live?
Thank you. So certainly in terms of the e-learning module, I can see Sue wants to come in as well, so I'll just pick that point up and then I'll let Sue come in. Absolutely, in terms of the e-learning module, we can make that available to members. It also references some really helpful videos around setting up workstations, etc. And again, I'm very happy to circulate some links to that if they're useful, because there's some very helpful videos from the HSE as an example around how we set up workstations and what things to look for, because I think they recognise that not everyone is working in ideal circumstances in the pandemic, but it focuses on what the key things are that we need to take into account when setting up a workstation. So they are very helpful. But yes, we can absolutely look at making that available to members. That's fine, as we do with a number of our e-learning modules. Did you want to come in on the other point, Sue?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just sneak in here.
Yeah.
So obviously some of these things aren't touched on in the paper, because the paper is more specifically linked to the HR people work stream. But in terms of the timeline, the current works that are happening on the ground floor are likely to be completed towards the end of April, early May. And obviously, as Sarah's already alluded to, that includes the members' suite effectively. So whilst the rest of the building will be unavailable to view at that point, because obviously there will be work still ongoing on the first and second floor, we are hoping to be able to open the committee rooms and the group rooms in May. But obviously, as soon as that floor is finished, members will be welcomed back in and will be able to come in and see the space. But obviously, some of that will depend on the government restrictions that are still in place in terms of the number of people that we can have on site at any point in time. And then in terms of the rest of the building, floors 1 and 2 are likely to be complete towards the end of October. So in the meantime, as and when restrictions are being lifted, obviously we'll be bringing staff back in as we can to Parklands, Goldings and Wade Road. But as soon as we can, we will allow others to come into the building in a safe way to view the building as and when it's completed. But as I said, because their workmen will still be on site on floors 1 and 2, probably only the ground floor will be available to view.
Thank you. Councillor Garner, have you got any other points you wish to follow up?
Not at the moment.
No, thank you. Okay, Councillor Regan.
Right, just a question about such fundamental change on top of COVID, which is unexpected change. Is there close monitoring of people's mental health issues actually due to the changes actually now and say in a year's time?
Yes, I mean, as we'll talk about later on in relation to the HR operations report, clearly mental health is something that we're always very concerned about in relation to all of our officers. And the impact of the pandemic on that is not something that we underestimate. And I don't think that we're necessarily seeing the full impact of amongst our workforce and, you know, more widely in society more generally. So yes, it is absolutely something that we are looking at and we will continue to look at. As I say, I think it's important that we do draw the distinction between the way that we're working now and the way that we're working under smarter ways of working. So the way that we're working now is in relation to the national restrictions and the stay-at-home message and the work from home if at all possible. And in doing that, we've helped to keep members and officers safe by minimising the number of people that are coming into work, as we should be doing. When we're at a point where we can transition from COVID into smarter ways of working, that was never designed to have people working from home full time. It may be that that's suitable for some, but that wasn't what it was designed to be. So in terms of the COVID response and the impact of COVID, we are monitoring that and we will continue to do at a point when we can move into smarter ways of working, which will be more flexible. People will be able to come into the office and have that interaction which they're missing. We obviously will continue to monitor that as well, because clearly that's really important. The other point that I would want to make is where we do have staff who are being significantly detrimented by current working arrangements, potentially because they already have an underlying mental health condition and or they're living on their own, etc. We are making provision for those staff to come in now. So we do have that in place for staff. So we are concerned for staff's mental health currently, and we will continue to be as we move into smarter ways of working.
And then Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. You partly answered a question I was going to. I have concerns, as some of you will know, that I've got no problem with people working from home, but I do think this has been rushed rather, and it does. Every other word is COVID. Now we hope we're going to break that COVID curse and not have it. I just wonder whether we've got people who may be joining us or may already be employed here who live in small houses or very busy houses and cannot work from home. Have we got, will they be forced into working from home? Or because the way it's going, we're going to be getting rid of a building, looks like, and therefore there won't be a choice. I have grave concerns. Secondly, I have raised this before, I believe, that what about heating costs for especially for some of the staff? They're not, especially the lower paid staff. If you're at home all day, you've got your heating on, so there's extra costs there. And I don't know whether it does affect household insurances and things like that. Have we looked into this at all, and have we got any answers to it? Okay.
Thank you. So to take your first point in terms of people not being able to work from home, as I say, again, I think it's important that we do draw the distinction between how we're working now under COVID and what that will look like under smarter ways of working. So at the moment, we do need almost everyone to be working from home, because that's sort of in line with the guidance, and in terms of making sure that we're safe for those that do have to come in. As we move into smarter ways of working, obviously that's part of what we'll be looking at with staff around those who may be in circumstances that working from home is incredibly difficult. And that could be for all sorts of reasons, whether that's because of a mental health condition, whether that's because of space, the people at home, whatever their individual circumstances are. And we will look at how we can work through that with people on an individual basis, because again, people's individual circumstances will be very different, but this is about trying to help people to work as efficiently as possible, and therefore we need to make sure that we can kind of adapt to that in terms of how people need to work to help them be as efficient as they can be, and to maximise the work, whether it's at home, in the office, or what that looks like. The other point I would make is there are still lots of available spaces in terms of people being able to work. So there are fixed desks, but there are also lots of what's termed things like touchdown points, so space where people can come in and work, whether that's for meetings or for other things. So there's still the opportunity for people to come together, and that collaboration, staff tell us, is the bit that they're missing most. So even under smarter ways of working, there will still be those opportunities there. But actually the converse side of that is a lot of people are really enjoying working from home. They appreciate the flexibility. Yes, they want to be able to come in and spend time with their colleagues, and that's important, but they also appreciate that focus time at home can enable them to get things done that would be difficult in the office as well. So actually there's a good opportunity to take the best of both elements of that under the smarter ways of working, and that's what we're looking to do. In relation to some of those operational specifics, that's what we're working through in terms of the policies. So what that needs to look like, I'm sure you'll be aware that people are already able to claim directly from HMRC an allowance in terms of working from home, and that's in our has been in our FAQs for staff in terms of supporting them during COVID. And we're looking at what we need to do moving forward to support staff working from home. So yes, that's making sure they've got the equipment, but it's also making sure we're clear what we're providing when staff are at home, what we're providing in the office. And as I say, that's part of what we're going through at the moment in terms of finalising those policies.
I hear what you're saying, but you're not actually answering my last point. If there's a cost involved for people who are working at home, is the council going to bear that cost? I.e., not everybody's on the internet, most people are, but if they're not, and they want a job, have they got to be on the internet? Have they got to pay? Is if the cost of heating or whatever? There's a long way to go, if you know what I mean, and we seem to be pushing on and say, well, we'll deal with this a bit later. And from my perspective, I would say we should be dealing with it now. How are we going to go? Yes, you can claim off your tax allowance, but that doesn't cover everything, and that's what concerns me the most, I suppose, for the staff, because that's what we're here for. HR is for the staff. I've got concerns as a councillor, I'll be honest, and I think you already know that. But I'm not here to discuss that. Thank you.
Sue, would you like to come in on that point?
Yeah, so just to reiterate what Sarah's just said, really, that is what we're working through at the moment, because obviously we have to consider that some staff will obviously make savings on their travel costs, some staff may incur additional costs being at home, and as an authority, it's very difficult for us to pay a benefit in kind for utilities at home, because you have to distinguish between personal use and work use. So we understand that there are some complexities around it, and we're currently reviewing how that may work, and that will be linked in alongside the review of pay and benefits in terms of how that all works out in the round. So it is an important issue, Councillor Jones. We're definitely looking at it, and we are looking at it now. in order for that to be in place.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah mentioned it, and it's detailed in the report about the impact of missing face-to-face interaction with colleagues, something that I don't think we can underestimate, but in particular in the roles that have a direct contact with the public. I've got experience of working on a contact centre. It was always very useful to be able to go and talk to your colleagues after maybe a difficult call. Are we doing anything special for those members of staff who need that interaction?
Thank you, Councillor Westbrook. So yes is the short answer to that. So we do have teams where we have allocated a number of desks so that staff can come in. The contact centre is one of those. So they do have staff coming in on a rota as agreed sort of between them and managers locally, so that for those who need that time in the office, that's available to them at sort of certain points during the week. And again, that's depending on what those individual staff needs are. More widely, teams have come up with a number of ways of keeping in touch themselves and being able to replicate as best they can those conversations that they would have within the office environment. But as I say, where there are particular teams such as the contact centre, where that's very useful, there is provision for a number of those staff to come in, and they are sort of coming in on a rota basis, so that they have access to that support. And as I say, more widely, they have access obviously to line managers and team leaders as they normally would do if they're having a particularly challenging scenario.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to Councillor Jones's point, I speak to staff quite a lot, obviously, having continued to go into the buildings for most of this pandemic. Just to let you know that I have had at least 3 people tell me that they are saving hundreds of miles of travelling every week, and obviously the savings in terms of petrol and the depreciation of their cars are quite considerable. I know this is not for everybody, and many of the staff live within the borough, but obviously there are swings and roundabouts as to costs for some of our staff, and rightly we are trying to do what we can to make sure that they have the IT equipment so they don't have to pay. They get the tax allowance where it is applicable to them, and they, should they wish to come in, have the opportunity to do so if it's best for their working practices. So I think we have, as an organisation, been pretty flexible. I take on board what you're saying, that not everybody has that opportunity to work from home, and it is not right that we penalise those that don't have the benefit of a spare bedroom or a proper workspace. But there are, like most things in life, things go up and things go down. And for some of our staff, it's certainly been an opportunity to save on petrol costs. And of course, the added benefit of that is that it helps our climate change emergency with the reduction of cars on our roads. Thank you.
Sue?
Sorry, if I could just come back to a couple of points, Chair. So Councillor Westbrook, just so that you know, in terms of, for example, the contact centre, we've also arranged specific additional support for them. And they were able to, we actually had a specialist come in and actually had small on-premises meetings for them to talk to each other, how to deal with very difficult conversations and how they could support each other through that. And that was all taking place in November and December. So that was a very specific piece of work as a, in response to some concerns that they actually raised. And then just coming back to Councillor Jones' point about will people be forced to come in, I think it's really important to understand that it's an average. So on the basis that we expect there'll be some staff that actually work on site 5 days a week, and that's not just the frontline staff, that could be office-based staff, but equally we have staff, we have one at the moment who has never actually worked on site. They're a member of the web team, and they've worked remotely 5 days a week since they joined the council some years ago. So what we're expecting is that in terms of how many staff we can accommodate, at any point in time, there are enough seats for every member of staff to come on site. It's just that obviously there are a number of fixed desks for people who want to work in the office and a number of spaces for collaborative working, which, as Sarah already mentioned, is what people are telling us is a really important thing for them to do. They want to come in and have their team meetings, talk to other people, etc. So whilst the actual space is split between collaborative and fixed desks, we have the capacity, if we need to review our assumptions, to be able to bring more people on site if that's what we needed to do. But I say it's an average that we're working on, and we expect there to be some people at the two extremes.
Thank you. Okay, any comments at all, observations in the report? No. Okay, so we're all in agreement to note the report, but also with Councillor Rattigan's point about staff interaction with members, especially come May, there's going to be a lot of new members, and also that all the e-learning will be made to members as well. So all agreed? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so agenda item number 7, which is the pay and benefits review project update. I think includes the name with it all. So if I pass over to Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So again, we just wanted to provide an update in relation to the pay and benefits review project. So this was something that we brought last year in March. So just wanted to do an update as to where it has moved since that point. So just by way of a reminder, really, and as I say, this is something that we talked about previously, why it is that we're doing the pay and benefits review in the first place. So there's a number of areas that we think need addressing within the current pay and benefits structure. And in summary, these are pay and reward for attraction and retention. So we've had some challenges previously in recruiting staff in a number of areas because there have been not only skill shortages in those areas nationally, but also sometimes we've previously had higher than average turnover in those areas. More specifically, we have some challenges based on our geography as a borough. So our proximity to London can make it very challenging because we have other attractive areas that individuals can go and work. And in addition to that, certainly historically and pre-COVID at least, it was an area with very low unemployment, and therefore it's really important that we have a pay and reward system that is contemporary, that's competitive, and that's also flexible. We've also got the underlying legal and financial risk around equal pay challenges, which is something that, again, we've talked about previously. So having a robust job evaluation system is really important. Having a system that means we're flexible and can respond to market forces, linking to my previous point, is really important to make sure that we can attract and retain talented individuals in the services that we need to be. We also need to look at our pay policy. So as I'll talk about in a minute around our pay policy statement, we've always focused on paying in the upper quartile for salaries. That hasn't always been the case when we've subsequently undertaken benchmarking, and that's been addressed as those queries have arisen. But part of this is around looking at whether that's still where we want to position ourselves as an authority. And finally, in terms of our structure, as with any organisation, structures develop over time, organically, as the nature of the services that we provide change and what's expected of us changes. So there's a number of areas within the authority where our spans of control, so the number of people who report to a single manager, that can vary quite greatly across the authority. And again, that's something that's really important that we can look at, because we need to make sure that staff can be appropriately supported by a manager. And therefore, if you've got one manager managing too many staff, they're not able to provide that level of support. So again, that's something that we look at as part of this programme. So in order to do all of those things, we have 4 work streams which are part of this review. So one is the introduction of a new job evaluation system. Secondly, and linked to that, is the review of our existing job roles against that job evaluation system. In addition, there's a review of our full benefits package, including pay benchmarking, and finally, review of the spans of control that I've just talked about across the organisation. So in terms of enacting this, we'll be working in partnership with Corn Ferry to deliver 2 of the work streams, those associated with the new job evaluation system. And through that, we're looking to introduce the Corn Ferry Hay system. Now, I'm sure a number of you may be familiar with that. It's a really extensively used and robust system that's used by over 12,000 organisations worldwide and has been used by 125 local authorities. So the system evaluates jobs against a set of common factors that measure the inputs required, i.e. what people need to have, their knowledge, their skills, their capabilities, and also the throughputs, so how they achieve their results with that knowledge and skills and capabilities, and then what the end results are, so what the achievements are. And those three factors they term as know-how, problem solving and accountability. So that's the system that we'll use to look at all the roles. And a key component for us is making sure that when we do have a new pay and benefits system and structure, that this is sustainable. So a key part of our work with Corn Ferry is a knowledge transfer from them to us and the upskilling of our own staff, both within HR and in the wider organisation, to make sure that we can continue to sustain this new pay and reward structure moving forward. So as part of that, again, at the time of writing the report, we were in the process of training a cohort of 10 job evaluators from across the authority. They have now been trained, that training's been complete. And we've undertaken a piece of work to map out all of the current job roles across the authority. A cohort of these will be evaluated externally by Corn Ferry using the Hay job evaluation system, and the rest will be evaluated by our internal trained evaluators, but they will be quality assured by Corn Ferry. So Corn Ferry will review all of the job evaluation that we're doing as part of this process. And the review of those existing roles is scheduled to take place between February and May 2021. When that's complete, Corn Ferry will support the council to undertake detailed pay modelling to look at what options we may have for future pay and grading structures in future. So the first part of the process is to introduce the new system and evaluate the roles against it. Then we need to look at what the results of that mean for the pay and reward structure we have moving forward. So we've started work with the job evaluation work streams. So the focus now, in addition to continuing those, is to start moving into the operational phase in our two other work streams. So our review of our benefits package, so that's really everything outside basic pay. So not only things that you might traditionally think of as benefits, such as private medical insurance, childcare vouchers, those elements, but also all of our non-standard pay items, so things like overtime pay, how we manage time off in lieu, how we do on-call payments, etc. So really looking at everything that sits outside of that basic pay. And secondly, that review of spans of control, so the layers of management that I mentioned previously. So they're the other two work streams that we now need to start work on. But yes, really just wanted to provide an update in terms of the movement with the job evaluation system and how that's progressing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor McKay.
Not a question, actually. I just wanted to record my support for the proposal Sarah's made there in the approach. Firstly, the choice of using Corn Ferry Hay, as they now are, on the Hay evaluation system, which is very well thought of. Secondly, the approach of using their experts to do a cohort within the council and then use internal evaluators thereafter. I've run a very similar project in an organisation of this sort of size, and it went extremely well. And I think the choice of the method is a good one. And as members, I think we should feel quite reassured that that will deliver the outcome that that Sarah's looking for. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's good to hear. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. My question is basically around it's going to be looking at assessing the worth of job roles. And that's fine for those employees who are told they're underpaid, but those employees who are being told they're overpaid, how long is the transition going to be to try and get the salaries corrected? And how are you going to cope with demotivating those staff that are told they're paid more than they're worth?
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Yes, I mean, you're right. The Hay system is very much about the worth of job roles in comparison to other job roles, but obviously it's very difficult to separate that from individuals. And in terms of, obviously, everyone feels that they do a brilliant job, and our staff do a brilliant job, and they all work really hard. But also what we found when we've done previous surveys, such as the Best Company survey, is staff themselves have also said to us that they don't necessarily feel that they are paid at the appropriate level in comparison with colleagues who they believe, at least from their perspective, do a similar role. And they've similarly put that challenge in around how they're paid in comparison to other organisations. So part of it is coming from staff feedback as well, in terms of them wanting this to be something that's looked at. In relation to the transition, I'm sure you're aware, and I think we've mentioned previously, that we do have pay protection policies in terms of supporting where transition is necessary. And clearly we would be looking to follow all of our policies and processes in terms of going through this. In relation to how staff feel around the worth of their job, absolutely, that's something that we're very, very conscious of. And that's part of why we're doing a lot of engagement with staff up front, and we'll continue to do so. So we had a session with staff at staff briefing to specifically talk around pay and benefits as one of the topics. And we will continue to engage with staff because this is very challenging, but also we want to make sure that staff feel that they've actually got a package that works for them in terms of rewards and benefits. So again, depending on where people are in their lives, what they're looking for from their role is very different. So actually this is about looking at the whole package. Pay is obviously part of that, but this is about looking at everything that we offer as an employer, so that we can try and make ourselves as attractive as possible, both in terms of people joining us, but also in terms of retaining the staff that we have. But it is very important when we have discussions with staff, and we will continue to do, that the focus is around the job role in comparison with others, and the worth of the job role in terms of the activities within it, not about the worth of the individual or a reflection of how hard they work, because we absolutely recognise that staff have gone above and beyond, as they always did, but especially during the COVID response, people are working incredibly hard. So this isn't about any suggestion that staff aren't doing that, but it is about trying to make sure that people are appropriately rewarded for the role that they do, and that that's fair in comparison to others within the authority, and also more widely in terms of the role that they do.
Thank you. That was not meant in any way as a criticism of any member of our staff, because I think they're all brilliant.
Thank you.
No, I honestly, I didn't take it as such at all, but I think it's just important, because I absolutely recognise what you're saying in terms of how this could feel to staff. So I really just, would want to make the point to staff as well as to yourselves, and we'll continue to do, in terms of the reasons that we're doing this, and they are really positive ones in terms of wanting to make sure people are appropriately rewarded. But we're very conscious of how sensitive that this is for people, because it is around their pay and their benefits.
Thank you. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you. Sarah mentioned earlier about regular meetings that she has with Unison. Have they raised any concerns about these proposals along the lines of what Councillor Gardner has just mentioned?
Yes, so I do meet regularly with Unison, and we do have two members of the Unison exec who have also been trained as internal evaluators. So as you may be aware, Unison are a key part of our current job evaluation process, and they will continue to be as we move forward with Hay. So Unison will be part of all of the panels that we run as they are at the moment. Absolutely, of course, they're concerned in terms of their members, as they would be, and wanting to make sure that this is done appropriately and done properly. I've talked through with them the information that I've shared with you, and also, why we've gone with Hay, the benefits, as Councillor Mackay talked about, in terms of why we're going with that system. And I am going to be meeting with them. So we're currently meeting with them on a weekly basis to talk around the budget and the staff consultation that's arisen from that. As that process starts to conclude, those meetings are moving into meetings around pay and benefits and smarter ways of working. So I will be meeting with Unison at both a local and a regional level on a weekly basis to talk to them about pay and benefits review. So they are working very closely with us, and we will be working very closely with them in terms of how we move forward with this, because again, as you would anticipate, they're obviously very keen to make sure, as we are, that this is done properly and robustly and transparently with staff, so that they can have confidence in the system that we're introducing and how we're assessing the job roles against it.
Okay, Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up a point that's been raised to me a number of times. There is, among the staff, and I'll say this publicly, there is considerable resentment for the number of interims within the organisation, both for the length of time they've been with us and for the destabilising sense that they have when they are working with permanent staff. Would you like to comment?
So I think it's very important for us moving forward, as it is now, to make sure that we have the right mix of staff to do the roles that we need to do. So obviously our focus has continued to be on recruiting permanent staff for roles that we need fulfilling. However, there are times where it is more appropriate for us to have either short-term contracts or to have agency or interims in, and that might be whilst we recruit permanently, or because there's a specific specialist skill set that those individuals hold, and or where we've had challenges recruiting, and therefore we're looking at different ways of doing that. So absolutely, we have continued to be committed to recruiting on a permanent basis, and that's always what we strive to do. However, there are some circumstances where it is more appropriate for us to use a different model, and those are the times that we do that, but that is the exception rather than the rule, I think it's fair to say.
Would you like to comment on the number of interims within the organisation? Because obviously we understand that recruitment, it should be easier in the current job climate than it was even 18 months ago.
I can see Sue wants to come in on that one. So do you want to start, Sue, and I'll follow?
Yeah, so I think historically we have had a number of interims across some very specific services. And obviously there has been a very positive and proactive approach to try and actually resolve those structural issues, look to where we can actually have permanent staff in. And certainly over the last year with the recruitment freeze, if we've had an interim in, it's only because we've not been able to recruit on a permanent basis. And there's been a service need to actually have some resource. So I would give an example of our current head of financial services and commercialisation. We went to the market and obviously attempting to recruit to that post. We were unsuccessful, and what we've actually done is put in place a fixed term contract for a year. And actually what we tried to do is, rather than paying interim rates, we've actually negotiated a fixed term contract. So I think there is a very positive approach to interims now, which perhaps in the past has seen a number of interims, as you say, Leader, working alongside our permanent staff with no necessarily clear delineation between what they're doing. Whereas now it's very specific, and only when we've actually attempted to recruit to that post, or there are no other alternatives, as Sarah has mentioned. So the number of interims in the authority has massively reduced, particularly in the last 12 months.
Thank you, Sue. I'm grateful for that confirmation. I'm sure our public who are watching in will also be delighted. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, any comments now into debate? No. So is that your hand up there, Councillor Jones? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Well, now you caught me. I wasn't going to bother. It would have. I did mention it before we went on here that we should have invited. That it should be invited the trade union representative for this committee. It would have been nice when they were talking about this sort of thing. Even if they're all in agreement, it's great and they can nod away or whatever. But we did agree that they would be invited, and yet again they haven't. So this is the second time I've raised it. This is now public. Okay.
Okay, thank you for that point, and completely agree. Thank you. Okay, so we're all in agreement to note the report? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so agenda item 8 is the pay policy statement. I understand that a few officers will be leaving for this item. I don't know if they're going to dial off or just stay on mute with their video off. No, they've gone. Okay. So this report sets out the pay policy statement for the council for 2021 to 2022. So again, we've got Sarah to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So again, I'll just go through a brief summary of the report. So as you're aware, every local authority needs to produce an annual pay policy statement for each financial year, which needs to be adopted by the council and also reviewed annually. So the appendix 1 to this report is the proposed 21-22 pay policy statement. So under the Localism Act, there's some key bits of information that we need to include in that statement, such as the level and elements of remuneration for each chief officer, policy on the remuneration of lowest paid employees and the definition for that, policy on the relationship between the remuneration of chief officers and other officers, specific aspects of chief officers remuneration, and policy on remuneration on recruitment, increases and additions to remuneration, performance-related pay benefits, termination payments, and transparency. So largely this pay policy statement is based on the previous year's statement, with changes made to ensure consistency throughout and to update with regards to some legislative changes and the pay and benefits review that we've just talked about. So just to walk you through the changes that have been made for this year's statement in comparison to that presented to you last year. So there's been some updating of officer job titles. For example, the term Chief Financial Officer was something that was used previously, which isn't a job title we necessarily recognise in the same way within the authority. So that's been replaced with the Executive Director of Corporate Services, who's also our Section 151 officer. Section 4.2, we've just noted the fact that we will be moving to the Corn Ferry Hay job evaluation scheme during this financial year. So previously it talked about K-Plan, which we've used before, so it's just updating to mention that. Section 4.5 confirms the current position with regards to the national pay freeze. So you'll be aware that the Chancellor announced a national pay freeze for public sector, which was towards the end of last calendar year, but there hasn't really been any more information since then. So that section just refers to that. Section 6.4 has been updated to include some details around awarding accelerated increments. So this was something that was referenced elsewhere in the pay policy statement, but it didn't really explain the circumstances as to when this should be used, when it was appropriate to be used. So this has just been updated to reflect that. And section 15.4 was originally updated to reflect the introduction of the public sector exit pay regulations. It's now been updated again to confirm that they were introduced and then removed. So that's the current position with regards to those. In terms of the statement itself, the pay ratio within the statement shows the gap between the highest paid employee and the median salary at the council, and the council's pay ratio remains low at 4.81 to 1. Just to pick out a couple of points towards the end of the report. So I've already mentioned the legislative changes with regards to the public sector exit payment regulations, or the pay cap. So they were introduced on the 4th of November, and on the 12th of February 21, we received notification that they were no longer to be enacted, just to confirm that there were no exit payments made by the council between those dates. So we don't need any action with regards to that legislation being withdrawn. The pay freeze, as I've already mentioned, we're awaiting further information regarding that at a national level. Therefore, the pay scales that are within the policy statement are as they stand at the moment and as they were last year. And finally, obviously, the outcome of the pay and benefits review will impact on the pay policy statement moving forward. So at this stage, it references the work that's going to be undertaken, but clearly there will need to be updates to the pay policy statement as that moves further through. So that's just a quick update on that information. But as I say, the key headline being it's largely the same as the same statement we presented last year.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
I'm grateful, Chair. Section 12, can I attract everybody's eyes to that? I would like on this review the percentage of employers and employees' contributions to pensions. Many of us in many of my residents are not being able to fund their pensions at the current time. And I think it is right that we have clear understanding of what is being paid by us as a council into people's pensions, but also what they are contributing themselves. I think that would be a useful addition. So can I suggest that, Sarah?
Yes, that's fine. We have that information available, so I can add that in. That's not a problem.
Okay, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Sarah. On 15.4, the wording is not terribly clear. What exactly is the current position?
Apologies, I was just turning to 15.4. So the situation with relation to the public sector exit payments cap is that the regulations were introduced on the 4th of November, which introduced the cap. And then we were notified by the Treasury on the 12th of February, as it mentions in their Treasury directions, basically saying that those regulations need to be disapplied in relation to any public sector exit. So my understanding is that a formal withdrawal of that legislation is due to take place. However, pending that, the instruction was given to us by the Treasury not to apply that cap in relation to any exit payments. But as I say, there was no sort of practical difference to us as an authority because we had paid no payments during that period that would have gone over the cap anyway.
That makes sense, but it could be a little bit clearer in the narrative.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions on that? No, okay, any comments? Councillor Jones?
Just a comment, really. It's a shame that our staff aren't getting a pay rise this year. We managed to put 3% or more on our charges to our residents, but our staff isn't getting anything with inflation off. And we've been praising them up, and we sit here, except, well, we haven't got a choice, it's a government thing, but we're not even making a noise about it. I find it strange. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I can't see any more hands. So are we okay to recommend the pay policy statement in Appendix 1 to the council, but would add in the pension contribution, so what the council make and also what the employees make, or employees, sorry, and then just do a bit of rewording on 15.4 to make it clearer. Okay, and then we can note the existing delegation to the Head of Human Resources, Communications and Policy to update the pay policy statement as a result of any pay awards which the council is contractually bound to agree. So we okay to continue with that setup? Yeah. Okay, so agenda item number 9 now. So this is HR operations and workforce update report. Okay, again, Sarah to present. So nearly there, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. And just to pick up on the point that you made in terms of the delegation around the pay policy statement, obviously what we said at this stage is we're still awaiting national information in relation to the pay freeze. So there's nothing's been proposed at this stage. So we're still awaiting that further information.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest that I go through this report in sections because there's an awful lot of information in here and I don't want to lose any questions that you may have as we go along. So if it's okay, I'll do a few sections and then pause in case there's any questions before we move on. So this is our standard report that we bring to every committee, which really sets out a number of key metrics, data, management information in relation to all sorts of activity that we do in relation to staff at the authority. And there's some interesting trends in here, potentially as a result of the pandemic and other changes, which I think it's important to highlight. So if I start with looking at our establishment and turnover, so as you can see, our headcount and FTE figures are continuing to show slight decreases year on year. And you can see in relation to the conversation we were just having around our use of staff, that the vast majority of our staff in terms of contract terms are on permanent contracts. And you can see there the gender split and also the full-time and part-time split. In relation to the number of staff that have left the organisation in the first 3 quarters of this financial year, that's decreased significantly compared with previous years, as has the voluntary resignation rate. Clearly, there may be a number of reasons for this, but undoubtedly it will have been impacted by uncertainty in the market due to a number of things such as Brexit and obviously COVID as well. But it's quite difficult for us to draw sort of long-ranging conclusions as to whether that's going to be an ongoing trend. But that's certainly the situation as we are at this stage. You can see below at 3.4 the reason for leaving. So they're all set out for this year. We had a request previously around reporting reason for leaving by grade. Obviously, there are some challenges around that in terms of things like disciplinary dismissals and death in service. If we report those against grade, there's obviously a potential that some individuals could be identified in relation to that. But what we have provided is the reasons for leaving, and quite a lot of detail around that. And later on, we have set out leavers by grade. So I hope that starts to address some of those questions. But you can see we've got our resignations by service area and also our leavers by length of service and grade. So I think if we compare our picture to national statistics on labour turnover in the public sector, our trend is currently below average, both in terms of the national picture, but also when we compare with ourselves for previous years. But as I say, that may be something that changes as the situation begins to recover, hopefully, from COVID moving forward. So another area that we talked about previously was around our exit information. So of the 30 leavers we've had so far this year, and that excludes those that we've dismissed, we've had 12 completing an exit questionnaire, and they've also been offered one-to-one sessions with an HR business partner, a number of whom have taken that up. In terms of highlights, the most common factors which staff cited as influencing their decision to leave were job satisfaction, personal family commitments, pay, but also management workload and end of a temporary contract. I would say there's still relatively small numbers, both in terms of those leaving and also in terms of completion of an exit questionnaire. And this is certainly one area of focus for us moving forward. And as I think we've mentioned previously, we are going to be introducing a new HR system. So it's a new ERP system, which is HR, payroll and finance. And part of the introduction of that system is us looking at how that can support us around things like exit questionnaires and exit interviews to try and really maximise the number of people who complete those so that the information can be as helpful for us as possible. But certainly where those exit interviews or questionnaires do show any issues or highlight any areas of concern, we do pick those up with the relevant heads of service and exec directors as appropriate so that we can address anything that comes up from those. However, I would say there's also some really positive feedback in those, with all of those who completed them saying they felt supportive and that their manager was approachable and showed appreciation, and that they would choose to work for them again. So there's some real positives coming out of that information as well. In addition to turnover, something else that seems to have changed for this year is our level of sickness absence.
Sorry, Sarah. Sorry. Okay, just to stop for a few questions now.
Of course.
Yeah,
of course.
sorry, yeah, okay. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful for that. I need to say, Sarah, I find it insensitive that a reason for leaving is death in service. Can we have a separate line for that? People who die in service haven't left us. I mean, they've passed away. I just don't feel it's sensitive enough to the situation for staff, and just a different line, if I could be really honest, and maybe that would be more in keeping with the tragedy of losing a member of staff. Thank you.
clearly we can separate that out. Obviously, that's not something that anyone would have intended to have caused any offence in terms of that. And I can say that I was personally in contact with the individual members of staff's family, and we did have a number of contacts with them in relation to that member of staff who did sadly pass away this year.
Thank you. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up on something that Councillor Rattigan said earlier about interim, can I have a comment, please? On page 87, 3.2, talks about the predominance of full-time permanent contracts, but the balance will shift over the next few years, or is likely to shift, to provide specified professional services on a more flexible and efficient basis. Can you expand on what that means? Because the way it's written, it gives me cause for concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to be clear that when we say that, that's not suggesting that we're going to be moving to a situation where we don't have full-time permanent staff. That certainly isn't the suggestion at all. I think it's recognising and alludes to the point that I made earlier on, really, that there are points where, because of the nature of some of the work that we do as an authority, some of which is quite unusual for a local authority, and we have some quite ambitious plans around some of the things that we want to do. Some of those do involve us using services that we don't have in-house, or particular specialisms that we don't have in-house. Clearly, where we do, we obviously use our own staff, but if there are particular specialist information or knowledge that we need, then on those occasions, we do use those specialist services where we need to. So that's what that alludes to, rather than any sort of suggestion that we will be moving away from a model where we won't employ permanent staff. That isn't what that's alluding to.
Thank you. Councillor McKay.
Yeah, thank you. In section 3.9, I appreciate the sample size for the exit interviews is quite small. And I'm sorry that the Chief Executive has left the meeting. So I think if I was him, I'd want to make sure I was aware that amongst those responses, one or two had felt they weren't clear on the Council's key priorities. And I just wondered if that was felt to be something that was agreed with, and if it is in any way, what the plan is to address it. That seems quite a fundamental thing to me.
Thank you. And yes, absolutely. We have shared that information in terms of him being aware that that's some of the feedback that's come through. And I would say that that's something that we have focused on. So if we look at the budget reports that went out recently and the priority action plans that have gone alongside those, that's done in terms of supporting the information that's within that budget paperwork, but also that's about making sure that staff can be clear in terms of what the priorities are for the organisation, and the council plan has them at a very high level, but what the priority plans provide is a much more detailed breakdown of what those priorities comprise. So I think that really helps to articulate for staff within each of those broad high level areas what our priorities are, and what the key things are that they need to focus on in the coming years.
Thank you. I think Sue's got a hand raised as well.
Yeah, so just to build on obviously what Sarah's just said, the other thing that we've obviously developed are more in-depth service plans for each service area, and that should feed in as part of the focus around people's appraisals and understanding how their role, if you like, fits into the organisation. So there's been a substantial amount of work of having not just the council plan and then the priority plans, but we have directorate plans and service plans. And going forward, they will be published on the intranet, so they'll be available for all staff and all members to view. And therefore, there will be opportunities for all staff to have a variety of different access to documents so they know what their services are doing, as well as what the organisation is doing to meet the council plan priorities.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gardner.
It was covered by Councillor Mackay's question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so doesn't look like there's any more questions. Any comments at all? No? Okay, so again, we are recommended to note the report, but one of the amendments in the report will be death in service. To revise that bit. Sorry, Sarah, you haven't finished the rest of the paper, have you? Sorry. If you like to continue, we've got section 4 and the sickness absence. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine, Chair. That's not a problem. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. Moving on to sickness absence. So again, this is another area where we've seen a change so far this financial year. So our average days lost so far this year is 4.17 days, which is 29% less than the same period last year. So absence overall is notably lower and below the target that had been set. So there are, I'm sure, a number of reasons for that, and we hope it's at least in part due to targeted management and support of both short and long-term sickness in terms of supporting our staff and managers to support them, as well as regular reporting and very proactive work around health and wellbeing and lots of activity in that area. But I think it's also important to reference the fact that there may be other external factors that have impacted that. For example, a large number of staff home working, I'm sure, as well as us not going out more generally due to lockdowns, is likely to have led to lower transmission of coughs, colds, flu, and other respiratory conditions that tend to do the rounds in the winter months quite frequently. And also home working enables more flexibility. So if staff may previously not felt able to attend the office, they do feel more able to work flexibly at home. What I would say is we've got ongoing work with managers just to make sure that staff are still only working when they're well enough to do so. So actually, even though staff are at home, it's still making sure that they are well enough to be working. And we have no indication that we have staff working who aren't well enough to, but that's just a note that we have there. But yes, overall positive in terms of the sickness rates. To go on to the point that Councillor Regan brought up earlier on, mental health related absence, whilst it's reduced in line with absence more generally, still continues to be our main cause of absence, as it is with other public and private sector organisations. So it's important that we continue to monitor that. The CIPD report around health and wellbeing at work identifies a number of public sector respondents seeing an increase in common mental health conditions, and that's a report they do annually. So I think we will see the continued impact of COVID-19. And there's a number of publications and evidence starting to emerge suggesting that mental health and wellbeing is being significantly affected by the pandemic. Obviously, we're doing a lot of work to try and support our staff at the moment, and I'll talk about some of that in more detail later in the report. But I think we may expect that sickness rates may increase as this continues further in the coming months because of the ongoing impact of the pandemic. But obviously that will be seen as we move forward. But we are continuing to try and focus on supporting staff as much as we can. So moving on to our workforce quality information, and then I'll do a break to take up any other questions.
Thank you.
So you'll be aware that we have a Quality and Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan, and one of the key elements of that is to increase the diversity in the workforce, and there's a number of activities that we undertake to try and support that. So one is promoting apprenticeships as a route to joining the council, and we do work with local schools and colleges. Obviously, less of that has happened during the pandemic. However, the team have still taken part in some virtual events with local schools and colleges. So we are continuing to promote that wherever we can. Also, our extensive staff wellbeing programme continues to raise awareness of not only mental health, but also physical conditions and how individuals can be supported by council and their colleagues, and also engagement with local forums when we're able to do so, which gives us valuable information around how we can promote ourselves as an employer in the local community. We are also due very shortly to update our information in relation to the last year around our workforce data and around how that benchmarks more widely with the borough. I would make the point that the data that we have in relation to the ethnic makeup of the borough by and large comes from the last census. So obviously you'll be aware that this year's census is due to happen very soon. So that will give us really helpful updated information that we can then use to benchmark ourselves against, which is going to be really important. The other bit I wanted to draw the committee's attention to is that we as a council have signed the Race at Work Charter, through which we've committed to appoint an executive sponsor for race, which we've done, and that's our Executive Director for Corporate Services, our Section 151 officer, that we will capture ethnicity data and publicise progress, which we already do within this report, within the workforce profile I've mentioned, committing at board level or would be senior leadership level within our authority to zero tolerance for harassment and bullying, making it clear that supporting equality in the workplace is the responsibility of all leaders and managers, and taking action that supports ethnic minority career progression. So we're absolutely committed through our Quality, Diversity and Inclusion programme to support all of our staff, irrespective of their backgrounds, and the Race at Work Charter is one way that we are looking to evidence that. I won't talk in detail about the gender pay gap just because we've obviously covered that elsewhere in terms of the agenda. And finally, just around our workforce ethnicity breakdown, as I mentioned, the data in terms of the wider borough is from 2011, which is the census data, but that most recent census data did have 88.2% of the borough as being white British. And as you can see from this data, 88% of our staff report as white British. So in terms of ethnicity breakdown, we do compare very similarly in terms of the most recent data available from the census. There's some evidence of a more recent shift. For example, school census data suggests an increase of pupils from non-white backgrounds in 2020 compared with previous year's data back to 2007. But as I say, it will really be this year's census that is going to give us really helpful up-to-date information that we can use to benchmark ourselves against. And again, there's some information for you around our recruitment equality monitoring. And I would also say that with the introduction of the new HR system, this is going to make all of our equality monitoring a lot easier to do and will enable us to report much more in terms of that information, which is going to be really helpful and a really positive step forward for us. So I'll take a break there before I go on to COVID-19 to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Regan's got his hand up.
4.8, you noted it actually about I noticed that the highest level for sickness was stress, depression, anxiety, and that's 33%. That's a third of the workforce, and well, a third of the people going sick, I should say. So I haven't really got a question. It's just a comment. I know you mentioned it in what you were saying about monitoring. And endorse what I was asking a question about before. So thanks for knowing. I'm sure you're aware of it, and you've got policies to tackle it.
Thank you, Councillor Regan. Yes, absolutely. We did reference it, and as I mentioned, it's a trend that's seen elsewhere in public sector and actually across employment sectors, and I think in society more generally. I think there is something that's really important for us around the work we do in terms of mental health, which is encouraging people to be able to talk about it and for people to feel comfortable reporting that is their reason for absence. And I think we have seen a shift generally, not specific to our authority, but more widely, where I think people are more able to talk about it. And I think people do feel more comfortable reporting that is their reason for being absent. But I think it's something that we're very, very aware of and something that we need to continue to support staff with. And actually, again, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but in terms of the support that's offered, it's trying to give different avenues, because actually people will feel comfortable with different sorts of support depending on where they are in terms of how they're feeling. So actually having counselling available, having an employee assistance programme, having mental health champions who are colleagues that they will see at work means that people have got different routes to try and get support, so that we can try and take account of the fact that people's mental and physical health is very individual, and therefore we need to try and offer a range of options to support. But we continue to get feedback from staff around what they'd like to see, and our mental health champions support us with that, as do our wellbeing group, because actually this is something that we need to try and tackle together because it is really important.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Equality monitoring. the statistics we've got there, are they based on recruitment or are they based on application? Because the comparison between the two could be interesting.
Thank you. Can I just confirm that you're talking about the table on page 95, the recruitment equality monitoring?
I am.
Yeah. Yes, that is in relation to applications received. And then you've got the workforce ethnicity breakdown in terms of, so there's the table in section 5.5.1 is the breakdown of the workforce as a whole. So yes, the recruitment monitoring is in terms of applications. But as I say, again, this is one of the features that's going to be really positive in terms of the new HR system, that we will be able to be much more sophisticated in terms of how we report the data, because I would absolutely want us to be able to really clearly and easily track through in terms of our equality information around our applicants versus our equality information in terms of those who are appointed, and then to be able to track that through the organisation. So I think the new system's really going to help us to do that, and that's really important work, not only as part of the Race at Work Charter, but actually because it's the right thing that we should be doing for all of our protected characteristics.
I think you've picked up my point.
Okay. I can't see any more hands. So we could go on to section 6, which is COVID-19.
Thank you, Chair. A number of these things I referenced in previous report, but obviously, as you can imagine, it's a significant proportion of the focus of staff, so I thought it was important to reiterate some of them. So the Council's Strategic Emergency Management Team continues to coordinate our response to COVID, and in terms of an update from when we last spoke around this issue in September. So our staff, as I've already mentioned, continue to work incredibly hard in relation to all of the additional work generated by the pandemic, both in terms of the national and local response. More recently, that has included coordinating support for vaccination centres, obviously supporting the work that was going on in Bramley, as well as continuing to provide information and support to residents.
Well, I think we've lost Sarah. Yep, she's frozen. Okay. Okay, I think we just give her a minute. She might be able to log out and then log back into the meeting.
For their own mental health need as well. So we have made provision for that as well. In terms of key changes, we have introduced the requirement.
Sorry, you zoned out for a bit.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Apologies. I
No,
think
that's fine. That's
at
fine.
my
Your
end.
screen froze. So I can't quite remember where we got to. Are you okay just to start again? Sorry.
No, that's fine. So I think we picked up in terms of the staff responding to the COVID pandemic and doing lots of additional work, and I referenced a range of that in terms of grants, support to the vaccine centres, etc. And I hope you had picked up all of that. In terms of following on from there, staff are working from home, but we make provision for those who need to come in either for service needs or for their own well-being. In addition to that, because the additional new strain, which resulted in the national lockdown, was seen to be more transmissible, we did also introduce the requirement to wear face masks when moving around on site, and staff have embraced that and followed that really well, which has been really positive. And again, in terms of site visits, they're permitted only when essential. And again, face coverings or masks must be worn. So we are continuing to monitor and update our guidance in line with national guidance and information to keep our staff and members who are coming in safe. We continue to report daily staffing updates through to the pandemic team so that we have a day-by-day view of our absence levels and also any COVID infections that we've had amongst staff, which have mercifully been very few. We've had the home working e-learning module and the space screen assessment that I've already talked about, which staff are completing if they're working from home, and appropriate adjustments can then be made. We've also introduced our virtual wellbeing session. And in addition to all of those, we undertook a snapshot wellbeing survey just before Christmas, which was just to gauge our change in health and wellbeing, working patterns and awareness of and access to support options. So through the survey, staff provided a range of suggestions in terms of other wellbeing support they would like to see, as well as positive feedback about the current options available. And we're continuing to engage with staff to seek further feedback and input to shape our wellbeing programme moving forward. So briefly going on to that wellbeing programme, as we've already talked about, the health and wellbeing of our staff continues to be of paramount importance. Clearly, mental health is very important in that, bearing in mind that's our highest reason for sickness absence, but actually it's about the physical and mental health of staff. So as I've already alluded to, we offer a range of supportive measures such as face-to-face counselling, employee assistance programme, which offers telephone counselling service, wellbeing training, occupational health service, our mental health champions, as well as obviously support from colleagues and a line manager. We ran some events for the Time to Talk, the national event in February, when our mental health champions ran some virtual drop-in sessions for staff, so that people who were feeling isolated or feeling that they were missing that face-to-face interaction were able to come and have a chat with a mental health champion if they wanted to do so. And throughout the pandemic, we've been offering a range of different interventions and campaigns to try and support staff. So regular newsletters go to our ops staff in parks and street scene to help them engage with important wellbeing messages and for managers to thank them for their hard work. Wellbeing advice has also been a key part of our Chief Executive COVID blogs and updates. We've created a dedicated wellbeing page on the intranet site, which has a whole range of information that staff are able to access in their own time and as and when they want to do so. We've also done some targeted work around World Mental Health Day, Blue Monday or Brew Monday as it was called this year, and World Suicide Prevention Day to highlight those campaigns and encourage staff to talk to each other. And we've got a range of initiatives that are mentioned there that we're looking at for later this year, including additional training, e-learning modules, and focus around World Mental Health Awareness Week in May. So we're continuing to try and offer a suite of supports for staff to take care of their mental health and well-being and also their physical health and well-being, but we're always engaging with staff around additional ideas they might have that we can incorporate as part of that wellbeing programme. But as I say, for us, it's really keen that we don't try and do a one-size-fits-all, and we recognise that our staff are individuals. They do all have different needs and requirements in terms of the support that they're looking for. So we try and offer a range of options that people can access as and when they need to. I'll take a pause there if there's any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions, comments? No? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So finally, around our learning and development activity. So as you can imagine, the pandemic, as it has with many things, has impacted and changed the way that we've been undertaking learning and development. And actually a number of our providers have experienced some challenges, certainly early in the pandemic around that, but actually they're starting to give us some options for virtual delivery, which is really exciting. So some of our health and safety related courses on things like managing aggressive behaviour and telephone aggression are being scheduled virtually, which is really positive. And again, they've only recently been made available, which is great. We're also looking at doing e-learning where that's appropriate, but there are clearly courses which we do need to do in person, such as things like first aid at work. And these have now been commissioned. So we're working with providers who can deliver this training in a COVID safe environment. So we are looking at all options for training, but also making sure that it takes place face to face where this is what needs to happen for the safety of staff and their colleagues. As I've mentioned, we've also run virtual sessions for staff, and I won't go over those again, but they've been really important for us and will continue to be moving forward. We've also looked at our e-learning platform specifically to deliver training to support staff during the pandemic, and that's been everything from support for staff on the community hub, focusing on suicide awareness, to personal resilience, communication, active listening, and also things around well-being such as working remotely and home working. So we also have those in addition to our mandatory e-learning topics. So we are responding where we can to all of the needs that staff are highlighting that they have. And again, trying to do a range of options. So e-learning, virtual learning, which replicates the best we can, the face-to-face, but also face-to-face where it's safe and necessary for us to do so. We're continuing to focus on how we improve our skills and provide training as well, and obviously apprenticeships are really key for us in that. We have 12 staff currently undertake apprenticeship qualifications. Again, the pandemic has impacted some of that, but I would say it's been really positive that we have had apprentices join the authority during the pandemic. And although induction is more challenging virtually, we have been able to do it. We have an apprentice join us within one of my own teams in HR, and it's been a really good opportunity for people to come and join us. We have to think differently around how we do induction and how we provide support, but we've been able to do that, and I think we can continue to do that moving forward, which is really good, and something that we're going to continue to focus on. The other bit to make you aware of is that we have also made applications as part of the government's national Kickstart programme, which provides funding to create high quality work placements for 16 to 24-year-olds on universal credit. And again, we have put in an application as part of Hampshire County Council doing a more wide application for Kickstart placements. So we are looking to, when individuals become available and are assigned to us, to offer placements as part of that programme. So as well as doing all of the work that we're doing to keep everything going, we're continuing to try and focus on our future workforce as well, and the council as an employer of choice in the borough and beyond, and we're really keen that we continue to focus on that, because actually it's really important that we think about the future of our workforce, as well as obviously focusing on our current workforce as well, and ensuring that their learning and development remains a key priority.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you. Just a quick question to Sarah about the Kickstart programme. I don't know a lot about it. It talks about it being a 6-month scheme. What's the intention at the end of the 6 months? Do we have a proposal for what may happen to these people, or does Hampshire County Council have a proposal for them? How does it work? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westbrook. So the idea of these placements is that really they almost act as a bit of a transition to support individuals into the workplace. So as well as having placements with us, which is about on-the-job learning and training, part of the placements also involve employability and skills training, and having a mentor. So that's things like CV writing, interview technique, etc. So it's trying to provide a well-rounded placement to support those individuals to be in a position to apply for other roles. That may be other roles within our own organisation, and a number of the placements have been sort of scheduled in frontline areas where that could well be very possible that actually we will have vacancies available that those individuals could apply for at the end of that process, or it may be that they want to go on to additional learning, onto roles elsewhere. But really the idea of the placement is quite different to an apprenticeship, is to give people a bit of a stepping stone and almost helping them transition from being out of work to being in a place where they can actively apply for roles. So it really is a key transition step for them that we can be a really important part of.
Okay, Councillor McKay.
Thank you. Just going to section 8.5 on the subject of apprenticeships, where you note that the council's not meeting the target. Clearly the COVID pandemic makes this a very difficult area. I suppose firstly what I want to do is urge you to rise to the challenge of getting things back on target as quickly as possible, as young people are without doubt going to be disproportionately affected by the pandemic. The question that goes with that is that you've said that apprenticeships are now longer in duration, so the cycle of yearly recruitment is no longer feasible. I just wondered if you give some ideas what is going to be feasible.
Thank you. So I think what I would say is we're absolutely committed to continuing to support apprenticeships within the authority. And where we have existing apprenticeship roles, we are still utilising those as an opportunity for individuals to come in, complete their apprenticeship with us. And then I think, as we've mentioned at other committees, a number of them do then go on to further education and additional learning, which I think is really positive. A number of them do stay within the authority as well, but actually, again, a number of people use those apprenticeships as a platform for further learning for themselves, which again, I think is really positive. So you're right in terms of picking up that we are not reaching the national target in terms of the number of apprentices that we have. But again, that is because where we would previously have an apprentice vacancy, we'd have a new apprentice in every year, where the apprenticeships have gone on to 2.5, 3 years. Obviously, we then have one individual in that post for the amount of time. So we've still got the same number of apprentices in terms of apprenticeships we're running, but we just have less different individuals in them, if that makes sense. But I would say we're always looking for new opportunities where we can use current vacancies with apprentices. And I would also say we are starting to explore even more where we can use apprenticeships, not only for new people into the organisation, but for our own staff. So actually the apprenticeship levy is a really, really fantastic opportunity for us to develop our own staff. There are some specific things around that we have to meet in order for us to be able to have people learning on apprenticeships, but actually it's a really good way of upskilling our own staff. And I don't think we've necessarily completely explored that to its fullest extent, but again, we're really committed to doing that, because apprenticeships are a really fantastic way of staff being able to learn on the job and bring that learning straight back into the authority, which is a benefit to them and to us as an employing organisation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we've actually come to the end of this paper now. So we're all okay to note the report, and then the amendment would be to revise the term of death in service. Okay, we all agreed with that?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, so now we move on to the review of the work programme. So item 10. So I appreciate that it's a bit of a tricky time to look at it, because well, we don't know who's going to be here and who's not. So yeah, Roger's off. So I think if we keep it to be timetable items, we just leave it on there, and then obviously we'll see what the situation is next year, and then we can decide what goes on there. Have we got any requests or anything to be added from anybody? No? Okay, so we'll just keep that as being noted then. Okay, so there's no items for the exclusion of the press or public, and there's no confidential items. So I suppose I just want to say thank you for all of your support this year. I mean, we had a successful recruitment process with Russell. So I think it's been a really good year, and thank you for attending all the additional meetings. And I'm very sad to see that some of you aren't standing next year. And I hope that if you want to come back, you do. I hope that I come back as well. So it's now 21 minutes past 8. So I think we can keep it then. Thank you.